Hi, I'm Kathy Muehlhauser with the Huron Historical Society and the Huron Public Library. Today is April 11th, 2009, and I'm interviewing Larry Macioce for the Huron Oral History Project. Okay, Larry, thanks for coming to talk to us.
My pleasure.
And you'd like to tell us about the east side of Huron.
Right.
Would you tell me who came to the east side?
Well, first, can I tell you where the east side is?
Yes, I would love to see that.
I'm just probably, the east side is, excuse me, to the east of the docks where most of the early Italian and Hungarian settlers worked. It's bounded on the south by Cleveland Road. Here's Berlin Road. Here's Tiffin Avenue, Ontario. Marconi's is here. Berardi's is here.
Right.
This is the sandbar. You know where that is.
Yeah.
And so it's contained in that, the yellow area there.
Right. Okay. So who first came?
The first ones that come, if it was time to get a frog in my throat, the first ones that come are the Hungarians. And they came from other cities, like Pittsburgh. One of the families came from Pittsburgh. I don't think they were solicited. They just were here, immigrants, and they heard about the work here on the dock. The Italians came later. They came in about 1990, but several, including my grandfather, had come here earlier than that, kind of cased the joint, went back and got his wife, came back.
And where was your grandpa from?
He was from a town called Isernia. It's in about the middle of Italy, up in the mountains, and it's about maybe 30 miles from Alvito, where most of the Italians were from that came to to work here. There was another group, like from the Toe, not the Toe, the Toe, which would be Calabria. That was Pisano's and Loritz's and Joffrey's. And there was about 3 families that were from a place called Grecia. It's down towards the heel. And each of these 3 groups differed from the Hungarians. I mean, someone knew, they all knew each other in those 3 groups. And they came here, worked together with the Hungarians. So it was kind of a mixed up group, but they all had the same problems and became kind of as one. They worked together. They became.
Why did the Italians come here from?
Well, I think the story I heard was that there's a industrial boom. They're building cars. Ford was needed manpower. Well, the whole country did. It was open immigration, but somebody solicited workers in Alvito, is the story I heard. They came there, and they got a handful of them to come, and they thought it was great. The money was good. It was very hard work, but they were happy to have work because there was a recession in Italy, in Europe at that time, Hungary and Italy. So the word of mouth got back, and then others came, and they eventually there was like 40 original families from these places that I just mentioned.
Who were some of the ones from Alvito?
Alvito were Macioce's, Fantozzi's, Tata, let me think some other names.
DeFazio's were there?
DeFazio's, yes. Fantozzi's, I've already mentioned them. I have a list there, but I'm not remembering it now, but there were like 15 of them. There were 25 Italian families and I think 15 Hungarian families. And of the 25, there were mostly Alvito, like about 15 families. And the others were from the other places that I mentioned earlier.
Did they come straight to Huron, or did they stop different places on the way?
Yeah, they did stop in different places. My dad, for example, came here with his father. My dad was 16, and they came here to work in Detroit, and he worked for Ford Motors. But then my dad met my wife, or met my mother, his wife. He moved here, as others did. There were some families from Pittsburgh heard about this job. I guess the pay was pretty good for those times. And the other, what I was trying to remember was some of the other families. There's, like the other group from the southern part of Italy, included Miolas. Now they didn't live in the east side, they lived in town. And there were Catres, Jabel, and Cozies. And there was a third group from Calabria, Pisanos, Joffreys, and Laritzas.
Why did all those families settle on the east side?
It's a good question. The answer was that there were properties there that were able to accommodate boarders. The first group that came over were the husbands without their families, and they couldn't buy a house, and so they stayed as boarders in these various places on the east side.
So there were boarding houses on the east side?
Well, there were houses that offered boarding to people that came there. There were, at one time, there were 5 men who were living in one of the homes there. As I'm just trying to think, the other reason was it was close to the dock, because they didn't have automobiles. They walked a short distance across the tracks and to the dock. Plus, they all wanted to be together. These families didn't speak any English. They couldn't read or write. Even in Italy, these families were mostly farmers, and they wanted to be together so they could, solve problems together. And so that's where they ended up.
Okay, Larry, where we stopped off was you were starting to tell us about why or how the east side changed in the 1890s.
These people began moving there, and they boarded it first, and then they worked very hard. They were very frugal because this was all new to them to be able to earn money to support their families. They had gardens. There were several raised chickens. My grandfather had a cow. There was another cow in the neighborhood. They would slaughter pigs with the Hungarians like once a year. They'd process the food. So it became a village within a village, sort of. They had a barber shop. There was a bakery. There was a community oven for baking bread. There was a tavern. They were somewhat independent, and also they were somewhat separated from the original residents of Huron because of the language barrier. The other problem was they had to learn, Italians had to learn Hungarian and English. Hungarians had to learn Italian and English, but they survived. It was very, housing was a problem when the new families came over, when the wives came over, they had to find housing. They missed their friends and their families. There weren't any autos, no income in the winter. That was a big problem because they would work all summer, and then they'd have winters off and there was no income coming in. The local stores, Andrew B. Smith and the Hart Meat Market, would give them credit for the whole winter. And I remember him telling somebody at one time that he never ever was stiffed by one of the families on the east side because they're so happy to be here that they'd want to. They couldn't have done that in Europe, and they're happy to do it, so they didn't want to have problems with it. It changed though after. Those were the early days, and then what happened was as time went on, they began to saved their money. They bought homes. They insisted on sending their children to school. I mean, every second generation person that was born there went to school, they went to high school, and the families wanted their children to become Americans. They loved this country. They'd given up, living in Europe. And as it turned out, it paid off because everybody finished high school and several went to college. And I was just coming up with a tally. There were 3 lawyers, a judge, a principal, 1 doctor, 3 nurses, and 2 engineers that were second generation Italians.
So they did quite a bit in a short time.
Right. Now I know less about the Hungarians, but they were, there was a very good integration between the families. There was some marriages where some of the Hungarian, in one case, the Duke Legando, do you know him?
Mm-hmm.
His mother was Hungarian and his father was Italian. Right. And the Alvito story is kind of interesting because that's where most of the people came from, and they had like their own little community. In fact, they had a society, which like a men's religious club that started, that they were involved in Italy, and they had it reinstated it here. They used to have meetings. I remember occasionally as a young boy, I remember they'd have meetings at our house, and they would do their thing, and then they'd play bocce and maybe have a glass of wine. And
so what did they discuss at these meetings?
I saw the book, and it was just like, it was kind of like Boy Scouts for men. I mean, mm-hmm. It was, but the main thing was drinking a little bit of wine and playing bocce, and
so it was a social club.
And the early Italians had a game called Mora, it was called, and the way it worked was you'd throw out some fingers, like throw out 2, and you'd throw out, I didn't know what you were going to throw out, but I would guess 5, and if you threw out 3 fingers, then I won. And they played it until they had 2 teams, and this was a drinking game because the winners got to drink a beer, and they wouldn't give any to the others, and it got to be fun, and they played a lot of bocce, Mm-hmm. Those are, I'm telling you now, the things I've observed when I was like in...
Right, when you were younger.
10 years old. And
now, when did the Sons of Alvito?
Oh, that started about 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody got the idea. It was kind of exclusive because it included only the ones from Alvito. And Joe Fantozzi was the kind of the guy who started that. It was kind of fun because we wanted to learn a little bit about exchange stories from growing up, cook some of the meals that our grandparents mm-hmm. cooked, and then out of that, several, I mean like 12 or 15 of them, there were like maybe 30 altogether, aging, they were like 3rd generation mm-hmm. on up to Joe DeFazio and I were the oldest 2 people there. But several of them, about 15 of them, went to Italy and visited Alvito and connected with relatives,
mm-hmm.
which was, and Ted, I don't know if you know Ted Temper,
yes.
Teddy Temper. He and Joe DeFazio, Joe Fantozzi, made 11 trips to Italy, like 1 trip a year for like 11 years straight.
Wow.
They became very good friends with relatives. They haven't gone for a while, but they enjoyed it, came back with movies and postcards and stories about, it's kind of an interesting place. It's right on the side of the mountain. Mm-hmm. There's a valley right below. My grandfather was killed by the American bombers. They were going to attack the Germans who were in Monte Cassino, mm-hmm. and they dropped their bombs late. And my grandfather happened to be working in one of the down below there was a valley, and that's where they raised their crops. Mm-hmm. And he was killed. which is kind of a misfortune. But that was they really had a good time. I didn't go. I was one of the few people who didn't go. I mean, like Jimmy, some of the guys took their sons with them.
Okay, well, let's see. What else do I want to ask you? Was there any prejudice with the Italians and the Hungarians and with the rest of the?
Well, there wasn't any between the Hungarians and Italians because they were kind of in the same boat and they had to get along, But being different, speaking a different language, having big families, there were some of the the Europeans that came here maybe a few years earlier, the Germans, that I don't feel it wasn't a strong prejudice like we're aware of prejudice now, but it was kind of like I'll give you an example. When I was a kid, and this happened even earlier, or probably more so earlier, but when I was a kid, the kids from the east side would come up to the junior high is, that was high school at the time, had a field in the back, and we played football against the guys from town. And everything was fine, we were having touch football, and then if we'd win, we'd start walking home, and they'd start walking home, and they'd yell back, "Dago, Dago!" And then we'd return and just beat the hell out of them, and then we'd go home. And because there was a real strong camaraderie with the and there were a lot of us because the Italians have large families.
Right.
There were a lot of Italians there, so living in the east side when I was growing up was like it was a real pleasure. There were a lot of guys my own age. We used to have fun. There was no TV to tie you down in the house, and we'd play at the beach. It was a great time to. In a great place to live at the time.
You want to tell me a little bit about the names of people, how they were changed when they came over?
Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you that. That's when these families came over. Macioce, Tata, Bobrow, Guglielmino. They arrived here. They went to the dock and they got signed in. And I forget who the guy was, but he was one of the local residents here in town, and he'd say, "Okay, my name is, what's your name?" And this guy went through and he says, "Macioce." So, how the hell do you spell that? And the guy didn't know what he was talking about, didn't know how to, So the guy went, all right, so he wrote down Macioce. And this is true. And they were Macioces, completely different family. In Italy, in Alvito, it's like Smith. There's several families. And then my grandfather went through there. They asked him, "What's your name?" And he said, "Bobrow." And they thought, he wrote down Temper. And that happened in maybe 3 or 4 cases.
Because wasn't Legando?
Oh, and Legando was Alcantara. And I'm trying to think of some others. Fantozzi became Fanduz. I mean, and this was just that these people didn't know that they said, if that's what you want my name to be, I'll be that, right. If you want, so I can live here and earn a living for my family. Let's see, you asked me something else. I want to tell you a couple of anecdotes that might be interesting about the language barrier. There was an old Hungarian guy, his name was Parrish. He was friends with my grandfather. And he was quite a character. He had this mustache and smoked this bent pipe, and he spoke very, very broken English. And he had a horse. And one of the people in town was just nuts about that horse. He wanted to buy it. And he went there, and he tried to buy it several times. And each time he went there, this Mr. Parrish would say, you don't want that horse. That horse is, don't look too good, He said, and the guy said, no, I want to buy it. And he finally kept it up, and the guy kept saying, no, that horse don't look too good. You don't want that. Look, And pretty soon the guy finally convinced him to sell the horse. He did. A short time later, he comes back. He's angry at Mr. Parrish. You sold me a horse that's blind. He's, I try to tell you, the horse don't look good. You know, that's a true story. And another one, I'll tell you, is that there were several stores in town. You could buy anything in town. You could buy cooking, pots and pans and everything. Now you, and one of my grandmother's friends, lady friend, wanted to buy a colander, for straining spaghetti, because pasta was like mashed potatoes to Italians. And she walked into the store, and the Italian name for this device is called scolla macaroon, macaroni, And she went in there and she kept telling this guy, I want to buy, scolla macaroons. And this guy, I don't know if he's a young kid or what, he's, I don't know what you're talking about. He's scolla macaroon. And she says, finally, after several times back and forth, she says, scolla macaroon. He says, the water goes through, spaghetti stay, And so, I mean, the thing is, they got by. Somehow they, and there was, and the prejudice you talked about earlier was that, they were, I guess, looked down upon a little because they spoke differently and they spoke was broken English and, but as I say, in time, they're great friends. Ralph Pisano knows everybody in town, and Ted Temper sold real estate to everybody in town, and so as far as I know, there's not any more.
Yeah. So, do you have anything else you want to tell us about?
Oh yeah, I'll tell you one other little anecdote, and then we'll call it quits. This catery lady that I talked to you about earlier, she had this bakery, and the local people, this is back in the early days when the people were here, they'd go there to buy bread. And her husband had a barber shop, and she ran the bakery. And this is, Ralph Pisano's father had the barber shop, and he bought this house from the Caterys later. But she would sell us bread, and her husband died early, as I was telling you earlier, in a railroad accident. But people would go there, and they couldn't read or they didn't know arithmetic or couldn't write numbers. So how are you going to keep track of how much people owed? Because they got paid, especially in the winter when there's no money. So she would, the trick was, and it was something they did in Italy too, they would find two straight pieces of like willow branch. And you'd walk in there, and she'd lay these two pieces together, and she'd come up with a code for you. I don't know how she did that. Then every time you came in, you laid your stick alongside of hers, and she'd cut a notch in it. And so you knew there was no question how much you owed. And when she told you your bill was $2, So that was, it was kind of fun being there, and it's changed now. Now it's, most of the people are gone. There are a few of the third and fourth generation people are still there, but that's.
Well, then who owned the cabins down there?
Oh, that was my my father went in business with my maternal grandfather.
Who was?
And that was John Tamburo, Temper. Okay. Cosmo Tamburo was his real name. And they bought this piece of property down over, when you were growing up, do you remember Cottages?
Oh yeah.
They bought that piece of property, and they began putting cottages on the property, like they have down there now. And they had the Cottages, which was kind of a restaurant and a bar, not Cottages, it was Pat's Place. And they later sold it to Cooch, and I guess Ted Tepper owns them now. He owns that.
He owns all the cottages down there at Nickel Plate.
most of them, there's one little corner which is owned privately that used to belong to the railroad.
Mm-hmm.
That was something, that was quite a place. The McKinley Street runs down to the beach.
Right.
And it used to be a bathhouse. Can you imagine a bathhouse in Huron? And as kids, I remember one time we swiped a quarter out of my mother's dresser drawer, and with another fellow we went down there and we paid our quarter. They gave us a basket. We took it into this little room, put our bathing suit on, put this brass pin with a number on it on our bathing suits, and went to the beach. Just wanted to be like the people that came there that parked up around Sandbar and needed it. But that was quite a place. There were lots of people, and there were two neighborhood bars. My dad had the first one.
What was that?
Pat's Place.
Oh, that was your dad.
Yeah.
Pat Macioce.
My dad and grandfather.
Okay.
And eventually Ted Temper, bought it all, and he runs it now.
Is there anything else you want to tell us about the East Side?
Not really. It was a great place to grow up. And you mentioned Prejudice, and we weren't. I mean, it was minor. It didn't really bother anybody, and it was just kind of, as I said earlier, it was the fact that these were people who were new to Huron, and it'd be like somebody from Somalia moved into Chaska Beach. There'd be a little difference at first because the customs are different, and but that soon went away. And
yeah, because now there's really nothing like that at all.
Yeah.
And everybody's married everybody, and
yep. And many of them moved out of town, but there's still families here. There's a lot of Majoy families as the offspring stayed here. So it was a great place to live. I guess I'll close with that.
Okay, well, thanks. I appreciate it very much.
You're welcome.
Very interesting.